This is MAUS, the only graphic novel to date to win a Pulitzer Prize, and some of you were very surprised to learn that it is being challenged and even banned in some places. So in this video, we'll break everything down. First, we will dig deep into MAUS and its multiple themes. Today, we'll focus on the first volume. Second, we will cover those who challenge MAUS and why they oppose the book. Third, we will also hear from Art Spiegelman, the author, and what he thinks about his book being banned. And finally, I want to address Thinking Critical again, because we actually agree for once, and I need to call out his double standards. By the way, if you like videos about banned books, make sure to subscribe because we have more on the channel, but also there's a very special event coming up. Banned Book Weeks is coming from October 1st to October 7th, and I'm planning a ton of content to celebrate. During that week, I will premiere a few banned books videos and other special videos. You'll find the full schedule linked at the end of the video. Don't forget to give us a like, it helps people like you find this video, and we're now ready to start with MAUS. MAUS tells the story of the author's father, Vladek, who survived the Holocaust. It depicts Jewish people as mice and Nazis as cats. These depictions really benefit the storytelling because it helps us, the reader, understand who is interacting with who. For instance, in this scene, we understand that all characters at the dinner table are Jewish. At times, some characters have to pretend to be Polish to survive. In the book, Polish people are depicted as pigs, so at times, we see mice wearing pig masks in public. The story is told from the perspective of the author, who essentially interviews his father about his story surviving the Holocaust. So throughout the book, we understand the father's experience through flashbacks. And often, when these flashbacks depict horrific events, we're thrown back in the present. For example, on page 40, after recounting a horrible story, Art's father says, "Well, it's enough for today, yes?" So although Vladek volunteers this information to his son, it shows how difficult it is for the author's father to recall his trauma, but he never expressively admits it. It also shows how much his father changed. In the flashbacks, he's depicted as endearing, resourceful, and heroic. He is kind to his wife, the author's mother. In the present, he's bitter, perpetually grieving the loss of his wife, and dismissive of other people's feelings. He's remarried and he's not very kind to his new wife. And it begs the question, did the Holocaust affect his relationships? As a reader, you think, surely this experience transforms the person you become, and this question is even addressed in the book. On page 131, Art tells his father's new wife, "I used to think the war made him this way." She replies, "I went through the camps. All our friends went through the camps. Nobody is like him." Art, like the reader, thought his dad's trauma explained his behavior, but his new wife, who is also a survivor, questions this narrative. So we, the reader, are left without a clear answer. In fact, there are a ton of unanswered questions in Volume 1. For instance, we learned that Art's mother, who committed suicide some years ago, had detailed her experience going through the Holocaust in her journals. Art looks for the journals, but he can't find them, until Vladek finally admits to have burned them. This happens at the very end of the book. It's an important detail for us, the reader, because we understand that this is the story of Vladek's from Vladek's point of view only. His mother's journals would have provided additional information, so we're left feeling as though we might be missing part of the story here. But at no point in the book do we ever question the legitimacy of Vladek's tale. His recollection is vivid and detailed. And Vladek's recounting is truly horrific. I think this is a good point also in the video to talk about the introduction of the book. The book opens with a quote from Adolf Hitler, which really sent shivers down my spine. It reads, "The Jews are undoubtedly a race, but they're not human." Volume 1 is divided into 6 chapters. In the first chapter, Vladek recounts how he met Art's mother, who came from a prominent Jewish family. As each chapter unfolds, Vladek's tale gets progressively more horrific. The book does a great job at showing how the Nazi regime progressively stripped Jewish people of their rights. It did not happen all at once. It also shows how difficult it was for people at that time to access reliable information. For instance, after the war starts, Jewish people start hearing rumors about Auschwitz, but it takes some time for them to realize that these rumors are real. In chapter 2, the war has not started yet, it's coming, but at this point Vladek's father-in-law funds a factory for him to operate. It's located in another city, but Vladek is quickly recalled home to care for his wife who feels unwell. The doctor tells them they should plan a stay at a wellness center, so they travel by train. That's when Art's father recounts seeing the Nazi flag for the first time. On page 33, a fellow passenger tells them, "I tell you, there's a program going on in Germany today." He goes on to tell them that his cousin was forced to sell his business to a German and flee the country, but he never got paid. They know this is not good news, but at this point of the story, they remain hopeful. They conclude, "Let's hope those Nazi gangsters get thrown out of power. Just pray that they don't start a war." A few months later, when they return from the wellness center, they learn of anti-Semitic riots in the streets. So the climate becomes progressively worse. That's when Vladek receives a draft letter and was sent to the frontier against Germany. In chapter 3, Art's father was eventually captured by the enemy. For the bulk of this chapter, Vladek is a prisoner of war. We quickly find out that Jewish prisoners have it much worse than other Polish prisoners. Whereas Polish prisoners get heated cabins, Jewish prisoners are left freezing in tents with barely enough to eat. Vladek and other Jewish prisoners were eventually transferred to a labor camp where they were exploited for their manual labor. They were eventually transferred another time under the false pretext that they were going home, that they were free. But instead, they were sent to another camp where they learned that on the previous day, Nazis had killed 600 Jewish prisoners. They were next. Fortunately for Vladek, local Jewish authorities managed to bribe the Germans and buy their freedom. Local Jewish people agreed to welcome prisoners in their home and pretend they were relatives. A few pages later, Vladek manages to return home to his family and wife. Until then, Vladek experienced the true horror of being a Jewish soldier imprisoned by Germany. But starting in chapter 4, Art's father describes the horror that the Nazi regime slowly imposed on the broader Jewish community. It started with Nazis imposing a curfew. That's when they start hearing rumors of Jewish people being brought to concentration camps. Vladek's business was eventually taken over by Aryan managers, so they no longer had any income. The SS starts to raid the streets and take Jewish people away if they don't have work permits. The Spiegelman family, who were prominent before the war, started to sell their furniture before Germans would seize them, but they did not get any payment in the end. Germans also start killing Jewish people in the streets and put other people on trains to never be seen again. At this point of the story, Jewish families start considering sending their children into hiding. Vladek and his wife have a son at this point in the story, but they don't send him right away. Also in chapter 4, Germans order all Jewish people to move to a ghetto by a specific date. They even offer rewards to Polish people who can find Jewish people in hiding. That's when Vladek's friends are hanged in the public square for illegally dealing goods. Bad news keep coming. Germans announced that Jewish people over the age of 70 would be transferred to care communities, but nobody believes them, so the Spiegelmen decide to hide the grandparents in a shed. But the Jewish police, who at that point of the story appears to be working with the Nazis, force the family to give up the grandparents or else they'll take other members of the family. The elders were sent to Auschwitz. A few pages later, all Jewish people are being forced to show up for a citywide examination. Some of them are sent away, never to be seen again. The rest, including the Spiegelman family, were forced to work in German factories. Their lives were controlled by the Jewish police, acting just like Germans. It's at that moment of the story that Vladek and his wife decide to send their boy into hiding to protect him. At that point, Nazis were brutalizing children and sending them to Auschwitz. But the boy would not survive the war. When Nazis marched into the village where the Guardian lived, Jewish people were ordered to board a train to Auschwitz. The Guardian preferred giving everyone poison than going to a concentration camp. This happens at the beginning of chapter 5, and it's one of the saddest parts of the book. Later in that chapter, and for the rest of the book, Vladek and his wife go into hiding, and they're forced to move from one hiding spot to the next. At times, Polish people hide them in their cellars or in their barns. In chapter 6, Vladek and his wife's situation is unsustainable. That's when they're told about smugglers who could help them escape to a safer location. It took some convincing, but they eventually agreed. Unfortunately, they were caught by the Gestapo on the train and were sent to Auschwitz. This is where Volume 1 concludes. And let me tell you, MAUS is a difficult read because it is a true story. That's why it was so shocking to learn that this book is being banned in some places in America. But before we talk about it, and we'll dig deeper into this whole story in Tennessee, but I want to address some criticism that I receive on my videos, more specifically on short form content. Many people claim that book banning does not exist in America. They tell me, I can buy these books on Amazon right now. Many users say that none of the books I address on this channel are banned because they're not the subject of a nationwide ban. To be clear, nobody claims that MAUS, genderqueer, or flamer are prohibited from circulating within the United States, but that is not the definition of a ban. For instance, bans on abortion exist in the United States, despite no federal abortion ban in place. Abortion is banned in Idaho, North and South Dakota, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and is restricted in other states. Just because there is no federal ban on abortion does not mean there are no abortion bans in the US. Just because MAUS is not banned by the federal government or by the state governments does not mean that it's not the subject of challenges and even bans. According to PEN America, it is important to recognize that books available in schools, whether in a school or classroom library or as part of a curriculum, were selected by librarians and educators as part of the educational offerings to students. Book bans occur when those choices are overridden by school boards, administrators, teachers, or even politicians on the basis of a particular book's content. School book bans take varied forms and can include prohibition on books in libraries or classrooms, as well as a range of other restrictions, some of which may be temporary. Book removals that follow established processes may still improperly target books on the basis of content pertaining to race, gender, or sexual orientation, invoking concerns of equal protection in education. I will make a full video about the definition of banned books during Banned Books Week, but one thing is clear, MAUS was the subject of a ban. It's shocking, but it's true.
This morning, growing backlash over a Tennessee school board's decision to ban a Pulitzer Prize-winning book about the Holocaust. The graphic novel, MAUS, by Art Spiegelman, tells the true story of how his parents survived the Holocaust, with the victims depicted as mice and the Nazis as cats. The McMinn County School Board voted unanimously to remove MAUS from its 8th grade curriculum, describing it as too adult-oriented due to its unnecessary use of profanity and nudity.
Unnecessary use of profanity and nudity? I mean, come on, Puritan culture really lost sight of what's right and wrong. Removing this book from schools is sad and unacceptable. Young people must be able to understand the world we live in, and the story of the Holocaust, as horrible as it is essential to understanding the history of the world. It's even more shocking that this ban comes at a time where anti-Semitism is on the rise.
School district's decision making headlines, with anti-Semitic crimes on the rise, up 12% last year. Earlier this month, 4 people, including a rabbi, were held hostage at a synagogue in Texas. And a recent survey found only 45% of Americans know how many Jews were killed by the Nazis. 6 million.
Banning MAUS is extreme, there's no two ways about it, and the author of the book had a lot to say. In this interview on PBS, he prefaces his remarks with a commentary on the rise of the right's obsession with race and gender.
I think it's part of the dangerous and perilous times that we're living in. A lot of it is directed at critical race theory in giant, frightening quotes, and part of it is directed against non-gender normative people's books. It's amazing how often comics come up as a problem.
He then addresses the school board in Tennessee.
The school board seems to be following an agenda, either consciously, if I want to be generous, unconsciously, of moms for freedom, for liberty, whatever, turning this into an issue of parents' rights rather than an issue of education and making sure that children are prepared for the world that is kind of barreling at them.
It's interesting to hear him talk about Moms for Liberty because I made a short about them a few weeks ago. Extremism has a new face, Moms for Liberty. They were recently named an extremist group by a civil rights watchdog. That's because Moms for Liberty are seeking to undermine public education and divide communities. They oppose any school curriculum that includes gender, race, and LGBTQ+ topics. They want a public education system that puts forward white cisgender children and ostracize the rest. For those interested, I make a ton of short content, so if you like videos like this one or this one, you will definitely like shorts like this and this. In that interview, Art Spiegelman also reacted to a statement issued by the Tennessee School Board.
We do not diminish the value of MAUS as an impactful and meaningful piece of literature, nor do we dispute the importance of teaching our children the historical and moral lessons and realities of the Holocaust. To the contrary, we've asked our administrators to find other works to accomplish the same educational goals in a more age-appropriate fashion. Tell me your reaction to that.
Well, I've now come to realize that age-appropriate is a broad range, and it includes probably 40-year-old people on that school board, as well as 14-year-old students in their classes.
Why do you think it's important for an 8th grader to be taught a book like MAUS?
Because in order to be a responsible human, not brought up with a lot of propaganda and prejudice, it's a matter of being well educated. But an ethical future is really important to redress the ways we've created an ever more divided set of classes in America. The difficulty right now of being a person of color in America are manifest. They've been made totally clear in the past few years. And as we get polarized around that issue, it's important to embrace it all.
I think the author is right to address the banning of MAUS in its broader context. He talks about people of color for a reason. Because people like Moms for Liberty, who advocate for a race-blind education, also advocate for the banning of books about gender, race, and ultimately, books like MAUS. Earlier in this video, we briefly touched on the notion of book bans. Some people claim book bans don't exist in America because they're available and can be read at home if parents want to. The author also addresses this matter.
One of the school board members this week said, yeah, but parents can read MAUS at home to their kids. That's fine. We just don't want to make it part of the curricula. Does that make any sense to you, and why would he say that?
Well, I think they would say that because it's part of localizing all politics at this point. School boards are much better equipped than Congress to pass laws about how children might be educated so they'd be useful and good citizens of a country in peril. But also it's a bit disingenuous for them to keep focusing in MAUS on a few rather mild bits of foul language and on something that I found really offensive. They keep not talking about the real issues, which is the Holocaust, saying, we don't mind teaching the Holocaust, but basically I feel they want a kinder, gentler Holocaust to present to their children. And what they really are upset about is there's one panel with what they describe as a nude woman, and then they describe that as sexual. I found that as offensive as anything they found in MAUS. It's one panel, not with mice, but with inset into the book about my mother's suicide. And
finally, the last clip I want to share with you from this interview is this one.
Tell me what you think the underlying fear was that's causing people to want to remove from the curricula books like yours.
Wow, I think it's part of a general and widespread authoritarian influence. Like when I try to deconstruct what happened with the school board, which I'm sure would be no happier with any of the books that are out on gender issues and race issues, has to do with who's in charge here. And they want it to be the moms for liberty. And the problem with that is they're not really equipped to give the children a good education. In fact, the school board is probably made up of parents who went to school in McMinn County and never got a good education that would allow them to deconstruct my book, for example, with any intelligence. Therefore, even though I didn't make it for children, if it's going to be in schools for kids who are 14 years old, that's not a problem, but it's better to be done under a curriculum that's giving supporting materials, that's actually helping one understand the issues more broadly.
I totally agree with the author. Schools and educators are best positioned to deconstruct books like MAUS and put it in its broader historical context. Banning it and saying, oh, they can still read it at home, defies the point of a quality education. But here's the good news. After the scandalous ban in Tennessee, MAUS skyrocketed to #1 on the Amazon bestseller list. At the beginning of the video, I said we would conclude this video by addressing thinking critical. If you watched my video on genderqueer, you know that this YouTuber advocated for the ban of genderqueer, so here's a quick clip just to refresh our memories.
Because they used to have some type of standards and values. It all wasn't about the weird mission of a few people to sexualize children and influence them from a very young age. It was about protecting children and making sure that they had access to the material that was appropriate for them at the time. How the world has changed. And the fact that there are groups out there championing for this book, Genderqueer, just to be accessible to everyone of any age, freely, without any parental supervision, just tells you how disgusting and how weird and manipulative this movement really is to sexualize children. It's something that parents need to be aware of. It's something I'm certainly aware of.
It bothers me that Thinking Critical is using the conspiracy theory that queer people exist to sexualize children as a way to defend the banning of this book. Interestingly enough, Thinking Critical also addressed MAUS on his channel, but this time he is against the ban.
I am against basically banning books of any kind, especially once you start getting into like the high school level.
Oh, now you're against banning books, eh? Interesting.
I'm just not for censorship, and I'm not for burning books and whatnot. So, and I'm obviously not for censoring or denying people the access to history.
We agree.
You know, is bad. It's just as bad as denying someone a copy of The Diary of Anne Frank. It's just as bad as denying someone the ability to watch Schindler's List.
We agree again.
The report continues on. It says, as reported by the Tennessee Holler and the Guardian, the McMinn County School Board voted 10-0 to ban MAUS from all its schools, citing the book's inclusions of words like goddamn and naked pictures of women. Apparently, the school board discussed the possibility of simply redacting words and images it found inappropriate, though ultimately opted to ban the book outright. When reached for comment by the Tennessee Holler, the board claimed that the book being about the Holocaust had nothing to do with why it's banned. Okay, I will take them at their word that it has nothing to do with the Holocaust, and it is about some bad words and some depictions of naked women.
I'm not that generous in giving them the benefit of the doubt, but sure, okay.
You can't put a pretty face on it. You can't censor it, and you should not be not allowing people to discover the events that happen in here and discover this piece of history, to be moved by it, be changed by it, and to be aware of how it happened. There's no justification. You can't censor it, and you certainly should not be banning it.
I'm sorry, but I need to call out the double standards here. Why is it okay to ban this book on the basis of nudity, but it's not okay to ban this book on the basis of nudity? I think I might have an idea.
Just because your child isn't ready for this story, just because you don't believe your child will learn from it, doesn't mean you should be denying everybody. It's playing to the lowest common denominator, and that is always a bad philosophy.
Bro, what do you mean it's always a bad philosophy? You thought it was perfectly fine to ban genderqueer. I doubt that Thinking Critical watched Art Spiegelman's interviews in full because he would have realized how the author links the banning of his book to the banning of other books about race and gender, like genderqueer. One of my criticism of Thinking Critical with regards to genderqueer was that he did not read the book prior to advocating for its ban. Well, guess what? I don't think he read MAUS either, because at no point of the video does he ever mention reading the book. Regardless, I'm glad Thinking Critical agrees we should not ban MAUS. But I just wanted to point out the double standard because we previously heard from him. As for myself, I highly recommend that you pick up MAUS. It is a very, very good book, although it is a difficult read. I will pick up volume 2 and maybe I'll make a video about it, we'll see. If you want to get MAUS for yourself, you can click the link below. It does 3 things. Number 1, it gets you a nice book. Number 2, it helps the channel because I get a small commission so we can make this show even better production-wise. And number 3, it actually helps local bookstores. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Click the top link to know everything about the upcoming Banned Books Week, and click the bottom link to watch my review of Flamer, one of the most challenged books in America.